The grand lobby shimmered under the gold chandeliers, marble floors reflecting every step of the powerful men who passed through. In the center of that quiet luxury stood a little black girl in a red dress, her small hands holding a leather wallet filled with $100 bills. Her curls bounced slightly as she looked up at the tall man before her, a billionaire surrounded by his assistants in dark suits. His silver hair caught the light like steel, his expression still hard from a lifetime of control. The entire room froze when the child spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, the kind that slices through silence without needing to be loud. "My mom taught me not to keep what is not mine," she said. The words fell like a bell. Every sound stopped. The CEO blinked once, his body stiffening, not because of what she held, but because of what he heard. Around them, waiters stopped moving. A violinist's bow hung in midair. The child stood steady, innocent and unafraid. Behind her, the waitress, her mother, covered her mouth, heart pounding. She had taught those exact words years ago in a small kitchen that smelled of pancakes and cheap coffee, never imagining they would echo in a ballroom worth millions. The girl turned slightly toward her mother, as if asking silently, "Did I do it right?" Her mother's eyes glistened, a nod so small it could have been a breath. The CEO's gaze dropped to the wallet. It was his. He had not even noticed it was missing. His assistant whispered, "Sir, the press is watching." Cameras from the charity gala clicked quietly, recording the moment that would later circle the world. The man's fingers trembled when he reached for the wallet. The child did not move. Her tiny voice came again, slower this time. It was on the floor near the elevator. "I thought someone important lost it." Her words hit harder than any headline. Someone important. The man swallowed, the weight of that phrase sinking deeper than he wanted to admit. He was used to being seen as important because of money, not morality. But this girl, this small stranger, had just defined importance in a way no boardroom ever could. He knelt down without realizing it, knees touching the marble. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For the first time in years, he looked small, not weak, but human. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Ava," she said, gripping the wallet with both hands. "Ava Brooks." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were wet. "You are very honest, Ava Brooks." The girl shook her head. "My mom says honesty is just normal. She says keeping what is not yours makes you poor inside." A hush spread again. The mother wiped her eyes, trying to stay composed. The CEO reached out, taking the wallet with care, not from a child, but from a teacher in a red dress. "Your mom raised you well," he whispered. Ava nodded. "She says being good is free." The line pierced him. Being good is free. Around them, the air shifted. The assistants lowered their phones. The violinist resumed softly, playing something gentle, almost sacred. The billionaire CEO stayed there on one knee for another long moment, the wallet pressed to his chest, as if trying to remember what it felt like to have a heart that small and that clean. The mother watched silently, hands clasped, her breath uneven. For the first time, wealth and innocence shared the same space, and everyone in the room felt what real worth sounded like. A child's voice reminding them that integrity has no price. The room slowly returned to motion, yet something invisible had changed in the air. The chandeliers still glowed, the marble still gleamed, and the expensive perfume still lingered, but all eyes followed the little girl as she stepped back beside her mother. Her small hand slipped into her mother's trembling fingers, and the woman, dressed in a neat red uniform with a white apron, squeezed back. She did not speak. She did not need to. Every heartbeat in that grand lobby seemed to echo the same truth. Richard Hale, the billionaire CEO who once thought emotions were weakness, was still kneeling, still staring at the wallet now warm in his palm. For a man who owned skyscrapers and silenced markets with a single call, he suddenly looked like someone who had forgotten how to breathe. He stood slowly, straightening his suit, forcing composure back into his frame, but his eyes betrayed him. They were soft, uncertain, almost fragile. "You found this near the elevator?" he asked, his tone stripped of command. Ava nodded. "Yes, sir. It was on the floor near the gold table. I thought someone dropped it, but I did not know. It was yours." The CEO nodded once. "Thank you." Then he glanced toward the mother. "Is she your daughter?" The waitress nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "Yes, Mr. Hale. I am sorry if she disturbed you. She just wanted to do the right thing." Her words carried a mix of fear and dignity, the way working mothers often speak when they know kindness can sometimes cost them their job. Richard shook his head gently. "She did not disturb me," he said. "She reminded me." The crowd began to murmur. Some guests smiled, others whispered into their champagne glasses, but no one laughed anymore. The charm of the event had been replaced by something deeper, heavier: respect. As Richard handed the wallet to his assistant, he felt the weight of years pressing against his ribs. Once, he had a daughter, not much older than Ava. Her name had been Lily. She had loved red dresses too. It had been almost 10 years since the accident, but grief never truly ages. It hides behind calendars and headlines until a small voice cracks it open again. Being good is free. The sentence kept repeating in his head like a forgotten melody. He looked at Ava again. "Do you always listen to your mom?" he asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Ava grinned, proud. "Yes, sir. She says rules are not for when people watch, but for when no one does." The crowd exhaled, some even clapping softly. Richard laughed quietly, but it was not amusement, it was release. The kind that shakes dust off a heart long closed. "Your mother must be very wise," he said. Ava turned to her mother, eyes glowing. "She is. She says we can be rich in our hearts even if our pockets are empty." Richard's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, but his voice broke halfway through. He turned slightly, looking at the polished floor so no one would see the moisture in his eyes. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. The usual sharpness, the commanding air that made executives shrink, was gone. What remained was something simple: gratitude. "Miss Brooks," he said, addressing the mother, "I hope this building treats you better than life has. And if it does not, you let me know." The waitress blinked in shock, unsure if she heard correctly. "Sir." He gestured toward Ava. "You raised her right. The world could use more of that." The photographers at the edge of the hall lifted their cameras again, but this time Richard did not turn away. He let them capture it. The billionaire CEO speaking not to investors, but to a child and her mother. The flashbulbs popped softly like distant thunder, and for once, he did not mind being seen. "Ava," he said, crouching again, "I owe you a thank you." The girl tilted her head. "You do not have to owe me. Mom says when we do good things, we should not wait for payback. That makes it smaller." The crowd fell silent again. Richard smiled, humbled by the kind of truth no business degree could ever teach. "Then I will not pay you," he said gently, "but I will remember you." Ava's small fingers waved shyly. Her mother placed a protective hand on her shoulder, whispering a quiet, "Thank you," through tears. Richard straightened once more, took a deep breath, and signaled his team to resume the event. But nothing about the evening would ever return to what it was. As the orchestra started again, soft and reverent, the billionaire walked back toward the stage. For the first time in years, the applause he heard did not sound hollow. It sounded like forgiveness. And somewhere near the back of the hall, a waitress wiped her eyes, holding her daughter close, knowing that tonight, her little girl had done something no money could buy. She had melted a heart made of gold and glass, and in doing so, reminded a powerful man that grace, once found, should never be lost. Later that night, the hotel lobby had emptied into quiet. The golden lights that once dazzled now glowed softly across polished marble, reflecting the footprints of those who had walked away changed. In a corner near the service hallway, the waitress, her name was Grace Brooks, sat on a wooden bench with her daughter sleeping on her lap. Ava's small head rested against her mother's apron, curls scattered like ink across white cloth. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound left. Grace looked down at her child, brushing a hand across her forehead. She still could not believe what had happened. All day she had told Ava to stay close, to stay quiet, to not draw attention, because people like them were supposed to move through rooms like shadows, helpful, polite, unseen. But tonight, her little girl had lit up the whole room with nothing but truth. Grace smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "You have your grandma's spirit." She remembered her own mother, a woman who worked double shifts cleaning offices downtown, teaching her that being honest was not for applause, but for peace. Grace had carried that lesson like a quiet song, even when life got cruel. 5 years earlier, her husband had died in a construction accident, leaving her with unpaid bills and a daughter barely out of diapers. She had no family nearby, no savings, Only a promise that Ava would never see her mother bend for the wrong reasons. That promise was what made her stand in polished shoes on tired feet every night, smiling through disrespect and exhaustion. But tonight, as she watched Ava breathe softly, that promise had turned into something visible, something the whole world had seen. Grace's eyes lifted toward the grand staircase where the billionaire had stood. She wondered what he was thinking now. At that same moment, high above the lobby in the presidential suite, Richard Hale sat alone at a mahogany desk. The city lights stretched far below his window, like veins of gold across the darkness. He had tried to pour himself a glass of wine, but his hand shook too much. The image of the little girl kept replaying in his mind. The certainty in her voice, the steadiness of her gaze, the unshakable simplicity of her morality. My mom taught me not to keep what is not mine. Those words hit him harder than any corporate loss. He had spent decades building walls around his conscience, telling himself that success justified sacrifice. But the moment that child spoke, the walls cracked. He remembered Lily, his daughter who never got the chance to grow up. She had been 7 years old when the accident took her. 7 years old, with freckles on her cheeks and a laugh that used to echo through his office when she came to visit. After she died, he buried everything that reminded him of her, including the part of himself that could feel. Tonight, a stranger's child had opened that tomb. He pressed his hand against his chest, realizing it was the first time in years he had truly felt his own heartbeat. Being good is free, she had said. The phrase sounded absurdly simple, but maybe that was what made it powerful. He thought about how many times he had paid to fix what goodness could have prevented. Scandals, lawsuits, broken friendships, all patched with money that never healed anything. He looked out the window at the city glowing below and whispered, "I used to know that once." Downstairs, Grace gently lifted Ava in her arms, ready to head home. As she stepped outside into the cool night, a drizzle began to fall, silver droplets catching the streetlight. She had no idea that Richard Hale was watching from above, seeing her silhouette through the glass. For a long time, he just watched, mother and child disappearing into the rain, until they were gone. Something stirred in him, something restless and undeniable. He called his assistant. "Find out her name," he said quietly. "The waitress with the little girl. I want to know where she works, where she lives, everything. And keep it discreet." When he hung up, he sat there, staring at the dark screen of his phone. The reflection staring back at him looked older, softer, human. For the first time in decades, he felt like he had just been taught something money could never buy. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was sleeping soundly, unaware that her small act of honesty had already started changing a man who once thought he could never change at all. The next morning, sunlight crawled across the cracked blinds of a small apartment on the east side of the city. Grace Brooks woke before the alarm, as she always did. Habit and necessity had trained her body to rise before dawn, long before the world remembered her name. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside and the soft breathing of her daughter in the next room. Grace stepped quietly into the kitchen, barefoot on cool linoleum. The place was simple but spotless. 2 mugs sat on the counter, one chipped, one clean. She filled them both with warm milk instead of coffee. Ava liked hers with a drizzle of honey, a small luxury Grace allowed when she could. The clock on the wall read 6:15 in the morning. Grace looked at it, then at the schedule taped to the fridge, 2 shifts today, back to back, 12 hours total. Rent was due in 4 days. She exhaled slowly. The night before had felt like a dream, too bright and too strange to be real. But as she glanced at the small red dress hanging by the door, she knew it had happened. Her daughter had spoken truth in a room full of people who measured worth in dollars and titles. Grace smiled faintly. "That was your grandma talking through you, little one," she whispered. In the next room, Ava stirred and appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Mama," she said softly. Grace knelt down, wrapping her arms around her. "Good morning, baby. Did you sleep well?" Ava nodded. "I dreamed about the man with silver hair. He was sad." Grace froze for a second, unsure what to say. "Sometimes people look strong on the outside because they forget how to be soft inside," she said gently. "You helped him remember." Ava tilted her head, thoughtful. "Do you think he said thank you to God?" Grace smiled. "I think he will." Later that morning, Grace walked Ava to school before catching the city bus downtown. The streets were waking up. Bakers pulling down metal shutters, men in suits checking their watches, the city yawning into another day. Grace held her daughter's hand until they reached the old brick school. Before running inside, Ava looked up and said, "Mama, will we ever see that man again?" Grace hesitated. "Maybe someday. But remember, we did what was right because it was right, not because someone saw us." Ava nodded and smiled. "That is what you always say." Grace watched her run through the gate, her backpack bouncing, then turned toward the bus stop. She did not know that at that very moment, inside a high-rise office downtown, Richard Hale was already asking his assistant for the file he had requested overnight. The woman placed a folder on his desk. Inside was a short summary: employee records, address, salary, years of service. At the bottom was a note in fine print: single mother. Works double shifts. No disciplinary record. Richard read it twice, then closed the folder. For the first time, a piece of paper in his office made his throat tighten. He turned toward the window. The city was alive beneath him, all motion and noise, but in his chest was a quiet ache. He had spent years signing bonuses for executives who never looked up from their screens, yet here was a woman raising a child who carried more integrity than most adults he knew. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "I want to visit that hotel," he said. "No cameras. No PR. Just me." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, that is highly unusual." "So is honesty," he replied, ending the call. That afternoon, while Grace was wiping down tables between lunch service and dinner setup, a hush fell over the restaurant. The manager appeared in the doorway, his voice uncertain. "Grace, someone is here to see you." She turned, cloth still in hand, expecting a complaint. Instead, standing in the entryway, dressed in a simple gray suit without a security entourage, was Richard Hale. His presence changed the air. The other servers froze. Grace's heart raced. She stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Hale?" He nodded once. "May I speak with you?" The manager started to interrupt, but Richard lifted a hand, polite yet firm. "Privately, please." Grace followed him toward a quiet corner near the large window overlooking the city. Her palms were damp, her breath shallow. She had no idea why he was here, but in her heart, she hoped it was not pity. The man looked around the modest restaurant, then met her eyes. "You were right about one thing," he said softly. "Being good is free. But Grace, that costs something. And you have paid more than enough." Grace stood still, unsure how to respond, as the hum of the city continued outside, and two worlds, one of marble towers and one of modest dreams, met again in the quiet corner of a place that had never seen power bow to humility before. Grace Brooks stood by the window, hands folded nervously as sunlight reflected off the glass behind Richard Hale. The restaurant had grown unusually quiet. Even the clinking of dishes and chatter of customers seemed to fade into a hush of curiosity. Richard's voice was calm, steady, but carried the gravity of a man who had spent decades giving orders and was now learning how to speak with sincerity instead. "I came here today because your daughter reminded me of something I forgot," he said. Grace blinked, unsure what to say. "Sir, Ava did not mean to cause any trouble. She just saw the wallet and wanted to return it." "I know," he interrupted gently. "And in doing that, she gave me something more valuable than the wallet itself." He paused, his eyes wandering toward the skyline beyond the window. "You see, years ago, I lost my little girl. Her name was Lily. She was 7 years old. I thought I buried my heart with her." Grace's breath caught, the emotion in his tone catching her off guard. Richard continued, "I built an empire to outrun pain. I buried grief under money and work. I stopped feeling anything because feeling hurt too much. But last night, when your daughter stood there and said, 'My mom taught me not to keep what is not mine,' I saw my child again. Not in her face, but in her courage. In her honesty." He exhaled, steady but heavy. "She reminded me that good people still exist, even in a world that profits from pretending otherwise." Grace's eyes filled, though she tried to blink it away. "Mr. Hale, I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say nothing," he replied softly. "Just listen." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a card printed on fine stationery. "This is a scholarship program I started this morning. It will be named the Lily Foundation, after my daughter. The first scholarship will go to your little girl." Grace's hands trembled. "Sir, that is too much. We do not need charity." Richard shook his head. "It is not charity. It is investment, an investment in kindness. I want her to grow up in a world where honesty is rewarded, not overlooked. Grace held the card, the edges damp from her fingertips. Her throat tightened, and all she could manage was a whisper. Thank you. Richard smiled faintly. Thank her. She reminded me that being powerful means nothing if you forget how to be human. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city and the heartbeat of something unspoken, respect. Grace finally found her voice. Ava does not even know what scholarship means yet, but she will. And when she does, she will know it came from someone who listened. Richard nodded. Then maybe there is still hope for the rest of us. Before leaving, he glanced around the restaurant, noticing the modest tables, the worn tile, the faces of other workers watching quietly from the kitchen doorway. He understood now that dignity was not measured by wealth, but by how one carried hardship without losing grace. You have a beautiful daughter, he said finally. Hold on to her. She carries light. Grace smiled through tears. She got that from her father, but she keeps it burning for me. Richard nodded once more and turned to leave. As he walked through the restaurant, no one moved. The door closed behind him, and Grace stood there clutching the card, her reflection trembling in the glass. Outside, Richard paused by his car, looking up at the building as if seeing it for the first time. Somewhere inside, a mother and daughter had given him back the one thing his empire could not buy: peace. That night, when Grace told Ava about the visit, the little girl's reaction was simple. So we helped him feel better? She asked. Grace smiled, pulling her close. Yes, baby. Sometimes telling the truth heals more than it hurts. Ava leaned against her shoulder and said quietly, You always say good comes back, Mama. Maybe it just did. Grace kissed her forehead. Maybe it did, sweetheart. And as the city lights flickered outside their small window, the world felt a little softer, as if goodness, once spoken by a child, could echo long enough to reach even the hardest hearts. Days passed, but the echo of that afternoon did not fade. News of the moment between the billionaire and the little girl began to ripple quietly through the city. Someone from the restaurant had recorded a few seconds on their phone. A simple scene, a man in a suit kneeling beside a waitress and her child. It was shared online with the caption, Integrity has no price. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere. Grace Brooks tried to ignore it at first, but the attention became impossible to avoid. Reporters called the hotel. Neighbors stopped her in the street. Even the school principal asked to meet Ava, saying the children were talking about her in class. Grace stayed humble, deflecting praise, repeating the same sentence over and over. We just did what was right. But deep inside, she felt proud, not because of the fame, but because the world had heard her daughter's voice and, for once, listened. At the same time, in his corner office overlooking the skyline, Richard Hale sat at his desk scrolling through messages from across the country. Thousands of strangers had written to him. Some thanked him for showing humility. Others confessed that they, too, had forgotten what honesty looked like until they saw that video. Richard did not reply to any of them. He just read, quietly, letting the words sink in. His company's board had seen it as well. They wanted to turn the viral moment into a public relations campaign, a chance to polish the company's image. But Richard refused. It was not a performance, he told them. It was a lesson. His voice carried finality that silenced the room. That night, he could not sleep. He walked through his penthouse, the same home that once echoed with silence. He passed the framed photos of his daughter Lily, her smile frozen in time. For years he had looked at that picture and felt only pain. But now, for the first time, he felt something different, peace. He realized that what Ava had done for him was more than kindness. It was resurrection. She had resurrected the father he used to be, the man who believed in teaching goodness, not buying it. The next morning, he called his lawyer. I want the scholarship finalized, he said. Make sure it covers every year of her education. Not a donation, an investment in her future. The lawyer hesitated. All of it, sir. Richard nodded. All of it. Meanwhile, life in Grace's small apartment returned to routine. She still worked long shifts, still counted coins for groceries, still kissed Ava goodnight before falling asleep beside her homework books. But something about her felt lighter now, as if the air around her had changed. One evening, while they were having dinner, just soup and bread, simple but warm, there was a knock on the door. Grace opened it to find a courier holding a sealed envelope. "Delivery for Miss Grace Brooks," he said. Inside was a formal letter embossed with gold. It read, "The Lilly Foundation is proud to announce that Ava Brooks has been awarded its first scholarship for academic excellence and moral leadership." Grace read it twice, tears forming before she could stop them. Ava watched, curious. "Mama, is something wrong?" Grace smiled through the tears. "No, baby. Something is finally right." Ava giggled. "Does that mean we can buy more honey?" Grace laughed, pulling her close. "Maybe just one jar." She looked out the window toward the glowing skyline and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Not for money, not for fame, but for proof that goodness, once spoken aloud, could ripple farther than pain ever could. Across town, in his office, Richard was also staring out at the same horizon. His assistant knocked gently. "Sir, the press wants a statement about the scholarship." Richard shook his head. "Tell them there is no statement. The story is hers now, not mine." When the assistant left, Richard turned off the lights and stood in the quiet. Somewhere out there, a little girl had reminded him that the world was not lost yet. And for the first time in a very long time, the billionaire smiled without pretending. Weeks turned into months, and the story of the little girl and the billionaire became a quiet legend whispered in places where kindness was rare. But for Grace and Ava Brooks, life moved forward like it always did, steady, humble, grounded in small acts of good. Every morning, Grace walked Ava to school before heading to work, her steps lighter than before. People smiled at her now, recognizing her from the story, but she stayed the same, always reminding Ava, fame fades, character stays. On a cold morning in December, snow dusted the sidewalks of downtown. The restaurant buzzed with holiday crowds, laughter, and silverware clinking like wind chimes. Grace moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays, her heart content. Near the window, a family was celebrating. A little boy dropped his toy car, and without thinking, Grace bent down and picked it up, handing it back with a warm smile. She never noticed the man sitting 2 tables away, watching her quietly. Richard Hale had returned, not as a billionaire inspecting his properties, but as a man who had promised himself to never forget. He had been traveling for weeks, setting up the foundation in different cities, but something inside him pulled him back to that same place where it all began. He watched Grace, how she moved with quiet dignity, how she carried tiredness like grace instead of burden. When she finally saw him, her eyes widened in surprise. He stood, smiling gently. "You have not changed," he said. "You still make a room feel warmer." Grace blushed slightly. "I did not expect to see you again, Mr. Hale." "I promised I would check on my favorite teacher," he said softly. "And your best student?" she asked with a playful smile. "She is thriving," he replied. "We send her updates every month. The scholarship board says she is their youngest ambassador. I think she is changing people without even trying." Grace's eyes softened. "That sounds like her." Richard hesitated, then placed a small box on the table. "This is not a gift," he said. "It is something that belongs to you." Grace opened it carefully. Inside was a gold pendant shaped like a small open hand with the words, "Honesty lives here," engraved on it. Her throat tightened. "I cannot take this," she whispered. "You already gave us too much." "You gave me more," he said simply. "You gave me back my humanity." The restaurant had grown quiet again, just like that night months ago, but this silence felt different, peaceful, grateful. Grace clasped the pendant in her hand. "I do not know what to say," she murmured. "Then do what your daughter would do," Richard replied. "Just say thank you." She smiled, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Thank you." Before he left, he looked around the restaurant one last time, then turned to her. "Do you remember what she said that night?" he asked. Grace nodded. She said, "My mom taught me not to keep what is not mine." Richard smiled. "And now, I finally understand what she meant. Power, money, titles, they were never mine to keep. But Grace, that was the gift meant to be shared." As he walked out into the snow, Grace stood by the window, watching him disappear into the white glow of the evening. She touched the pendant against her chest and whispered, "Some lessons come from the smallest voices." Outside, the city lights flickered, and for the first time in years, the billionaire and the waitress were bound by something greater than circumstance, a shared truth that goodness, once found, never fades away. The months that followed brought change neither of them had planned, but both had earned. Grace Brooks found herself invited to community events, not because she was famous, but because people trusted her voice. She spoke softly about dignity, about teaching children values that cost nothing. Every time she mentioned her daughter, her eyes shone with pride. Ava, now a little older, had become the heart of her school's kindness program. Teachers said other children followed her lead, returning lost things, sharing lunches, standing up for each other. Grace knew that what her daughter had done in a single sentence was shaping lives she might never meet. Across town, Richard Hale watched from a quiet distance. He no longer measured success by numbers or awards. Instead, he measured it by stories, the letters he received from students supported by the Lilly Foundation. They came from small towns and big cities, each beginning the same way. Thank you for believing in honesty. His office walls no longer displayed trophies or market graphs. Instead, they were lined with drawings from children, simple crayon pictures of hope. One afternoon, he attended a foundation ceremony at a local school. He stood in the back as a young boy read a short essay about truth. When the boy finished, Richard turned to leave quietly, but the principal stopped him. "Mr. Hale, would you like to say something to the students?" Richard hesitated, then faced the small crowd of children staring up at him. "I once met a little girl who reminded me that being good does not need applause," he said. "It just needs courage. And sometimes, courage looks like kindness." The children clapped politely, but among them, a girl in a red ribbon raised her hand and asked, "What happened to her?" Richard smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and gratitude. "She is out there," he said, "still teaching the world, one heart at a time." Later that night, he sat at his desk, watching the city lights flicker like candle flames. He whispered the words that had started it all. "My mom taught me not to keep what is not mine." For a long moment, he let the silence hold him. Then, for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for success, but for grace. Across the city, Grace tucked Ava into bed, kissed her forehead, and turned off the lamp. The same prayer echoed softly in both their rooms, gratitude for what was lost and found again, and for the simple truth that integrity, once spoken, can heal even the richest heart. On a quiet evening nearly 1 year later, the sun dipped behind the skyline and poured gold through the windows of the same hotel lobby where everything had begun. The marble floor gleamed, but this time it was not filled with noise or wealth. It was filled with warmth. Near the center of the room stood a small sign that read, "The Lilly Foundation Scholarship Gala." Guests talked softly, but every voice carried gentleness. Instead of pride, Grace Brooks stood at the edge of the room, wearing a simple navy dress, her hands resting on her daughter's shoulders. Ava looked older now, her red ribbon shining under the light. Cameras flashed, yet the moment felt sacred. When the announcer called Ava's name, the room erupted into applause. She walked toward the stage, holding a handwritten note. Her small voice carried through the microphone, calm and sure. "My mom says being good is not about being noticed," she began. "It is about doing the right thing even when nobody sees. I think that is how the world gets better, one honest heart at a time." The audience fell silent. Some smiled, others wiped tears, but everyone listened. Richard Hale, seated in the front row, bowed his head. The little girl had once melted his heart. Now she reminded him how to keep it open. When Ava finished, she looked for her mother, and Grace nodded proudly, whispering, "That is my baby." The evening closed with quiet music and slow applause. As the lights dimmed, the camera lingered on their faces, mother, daughter, and the man whose soul they had changed. A soft voice echoed the final line of the story. She did not speak to be praised. She spoke to be true. Because real wealth is not measured in dollars, it is measured in dignity. And as the screen faded to black, one final line appeared in gold letters. Because integrity is the only fortune that never fades.